Number 8. Rhett Carty Shaw and Kyori Mori Akiro. When 17-year-old Kyori Mori Akiro discovered that her on-again, off-again boyfriend, Rhett Carty Shaw, also 17, was still seeing his ex behind her back, she began pushing him to prove his loyalty. Akiro stated she felt humiliated and betrayed, and the only solution would be to get rid of his ex. In May 2019, Carty Shaw visited his former lover, Imran Nasir, in her house in Openshaw, Greater Manchester, England. The young woman had just given birth to their child only 2 months before. After having been intimate with Nasir, Carty Shaw pulled out a knife and stabbed her repeatedly in the face and neck, while also beating her savagely. Meanwhile, Akiro kept control of the situation from afar, texting her boyfriend over 50 times, demanding he filmed the attack. He left Nasir for dead, letting his girlfriend know that he had gone through with their plan, stating, "I did it to prove I love you." Nasir somehow survived the attack and had to be hospitalized for 4 days, while requiring multiple surgeries. She testified against the pair in court, explaining the injuries made it impossible for her to pick up her own baby, and talking about the emotional and physical damage the attack had caused her. On December the 20th, 2019, Carty Shaw and Mori Akiro were each convicted to 16 years in prison for attempted murder and intentionally assisting a person to commit murder, respectively. Number 7. Julio Garay. On July the 14th, 2020, Julio Garay ambushed and murdered his estranged wife on her way to a doctor's appointment in Camarena Health Center in Madera, California. Kyori Jean Garay had recently gotten a restraining order against her husband. It was after 7 long years of abuse, being subjected to attacks with screwdrivers, fire pokers, chainsaw blades, and any other household object at hand, that she finally escaped the marriage along with their 3 kids, with only $19 in her pocket. On the day of the murder, Garay approached Kyori Jean and their 3 children and started shooting at them before they could find refuge. She died at the scene, trying to keep the boys from harm, using her body as a shield. Dale Bleer, the case's preceding judge, referred to the defendant as a self-absorbed narcissist who appeared laser-focused on destroying everything that was important to Kyori. 50-year-old Garay was found guilty of first-degree murder and 3 counts of child abuse on November 17th, 2021. Given the charges, the only possible sentence was life without the possibility of parole. Soon after the trial, California passed Cali's law, meant to ensure victims of domestic abuse are granted the same protection rights that could have saved the mother of 3's life. Number 6. Jessica Smith. 40-year-old mother of 2 Jessica Smith showed no regrets while addressing the court, accused of murdering her toddler and harming her 13-year-old daughter. On August 17, 2016, Smith and her husband had been involved in a custody dispute back in 2014 when the attack took place. The family court judge had ordered a 1-day visitation regime in favor of the father, but Jessica refused to give the children over to her ex, taking them to a motel in Cannon Beach, Oregon instead. Smith claimed her kids were terrified of their father and that her daughter, Alana, told her she'd rather be dead than live with him. On July 31st, 2014, Smith attacked both her own children, with only Alana surviving the ordeal. When police finally caught up with Smith, they found that she had been living out of her car and was trying to starve herself. It took 2 more years for her to be convicted for her crimes. She opted to enter an Alford plea, in which the defendant maintains their innocence while admitting that there is enough evidence to find them guilty. Smith was sentenced to life in prison with parole eligibility after 40 years served. Number 5. Kyle Overmeyer. Former Sandusky County Sheriff Kyle Overmeyer was branded a narcissist by Judge Patricia Cosgrove, who officiated over his 2016 trial. Overmeyer was accused of taking advantage of his office for his own benefit, using public funds to finance family vacations, meals, and his own re-election campaign. He also had developed an addiction to painkillers, and though he was prescribed over 1,000 pills over a 2-year period, he still tried to find illegal ways to feed his needs. Overmeyer began to steal discarded drug take-back boxes from 4 different police departments under his command. Of the 43 charges he was indicted with, He pleaded guilty to 13 felony counts. On November the 22nd, 2016, Overmeyer sobbed as he admitted to his crimes, asking to be allowed to go into rehab in lieu of a stricter sentence. Judge Cosgrove didn't believe his remorse and rejected his plea for mercy. As well as being sentenced to 4 years in prison, Overmeyer was forced to use his state retirement pension to pay the state a restitution of $24,000. Overmeyer was released in April 2022, spending the last 180 days of his sentence in a halfway house. Number 4. Ian Stewart. Using what's known in psychology as cognitive distortion, murderer Ian Stewart was able to carry on with his life as usual after assassinating not one, but 2 romantic partners, allowing him to avoid suspicion for over 6 years. On June 25, 2010, Stewart murdered his wife Diana at their home in Basingbourn, England. The death was considered accidental in part due to her husband's 999 call, in which he claimed to have discovered Diana lying unconscious in their back garden. His wife, he explained, had a history of epilepsy. It was only after he drugged and suffocated his new fiancée, acclaimed author Helen Bailey, in 2016 that police took a closer look at Diana's death. Already serving a life sentence for Bailey's assassination, Stewart allegedly asked investigators, "Haven't you got anything better to do?" Though his first wife's body had been cremated, Stewart at the time had decided to donate Diana's brain to science. It had been adequately preserved for 6 years, making an autopsy of the organ possible. The inspection led medical examiners to change the cause of death to prolonged restriction to her breathing from an outside source. Psychologists connected with the case theorized Stewart had narcissistic tendencies and viewed the women in his life as means to an end. The motive behind both murders was monetary. First, the defendant received £100,000 after his wife's death, and he stood to inherit £4 million from Helen's estate. Number 3. The murder of Grace Mlane. British marketing graduate Grace Mlane went missing in Auckland on December 1st, 2018, while backpacking in New Zealand. It was the day before her 22nd birthday, and she had planned to celebrate by going on a date with Jesse Kempson, a man she'd met on Tinder. The family grew concerned after not receiving a response to their happy birthday messages. 2 days after her disappearance, they contacted the Auckland police, who launched an investigation. Her body would be recovered 8 days later, stuffed into a suitcase in a fetal position. Investigators zeroed in on Kempson as their main suspect after discovering a post on her Facebook page and realizing that he was probably the last person to have been in contact with Mlane. After being confronted with CCTV videos of himself wheeling the suitcase out of a hotel lobby, Kempson confessed to the murder. He told investigators that he had purchased the bag after the crime and had abandoned it in Waitakere Ranges, a mountainous region west of Auckland. The trial lasted only 3 weeks, and the prosecution called several witnesses to the stand, all of which portrayed Kempson as a narcissistic, compulsive liar who had alienated himself from family and friends, who was obsessed with dating as many women as possible. He had rused Tinder dates into believing he had cancer, had been adopted and neglected as a child, and even that he was friends with several celebrities. Finally, in February 2020, he was convicted to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 17 years. Today's topic was inspired by the one silver shadow. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Sherry Papini. On November 2nd, 2016, California resident Sherry Papini disappeared while out jogging. Local authorities contacted the FBI and a search party was assembled. She reappeared 22 days later, 150 miles south of her home, claiming to have been kidnapped by 2 Hispanic men. The mother of 2 seemed to be hurt and in shock as she gave her statement. Authorities, though, noticed inconsistencies in her story, and an investigation led them to discover Papini had run away to live with her ex-boyfriend. Police also found all of her wounds to have been self-inflicted. For 6 years, the investigation continued, with multiple interrogations being conducted by both the police and FBI. Papini maintained her version of events, even after being warned that lying to the FBI was considered a federal offense. She went as far as to apply for monetary benefits and received over $30,000 from the California Victims Compensation Board. Finally, in March 2022, Papini was arrested, pleading guilty to mail fraud and making a false statement to federal agents. She claimed to be ashamed of her behavior and issued a public apology, but County Sheriff Michael L. Johnson, who was involved in the investigation from the start, denied this was the case. Johnson called Papini out for her behavior, stating the case was about some very strong narcissistic behavior, along with deception, deceit, and selfishness, and that her confession and supplementary apology was the result of a plea deal offered by the state. Number 1. Michelle Carter. Michelle Carter and Conrad Roy met in 2012 in Florida, and though they only saw each other in person a handful of times, they created a strong bond over text messages. Roy had been dealing with self-destructive ideation for years. At first, Carter tried to help him get through it, but after he told her he wanted them to be like Romeo and Juliet, her attitude changed. From June 2014 to his death on July the 13th of the same year, the young woman sent Roy hundreds of messages encouraging him to take his own life. On that day, Roy drove to a Kmart parking lot in Fairhaven, Massachusetts, carrying a gas-powered water pump in the back seat. He sat there with his windows up, breathing in carbon monoxide as Carter encouraged him over the phone. At one point, Roy changed his mind and left the truck, but after a call from Carter, he got back inside. It took him 20 minutes to die. 2 days later, Carter told a friend, Samantha Broadman, that he was missing. Broadman would later testify in the trial, stating that Carter's accounts of the facts kept changing. When Carter's messages were discovered, authorities debated themselves on whether charges could be pressed, as there was no direct precedent. On February 4, 2015, she was indicted for involuntary manslaughter. Carter was charged as a youthful offender, meaning she could be tried as an adult instead of a juvenile. Judge Moniz found her guilty on June 16, 2017, finding that Roy had broken the chain of self-causation when he abandoned the car, and that had it not been for Carter's wanton encouragement, he would still be alive. She was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison and 5 years probation. Her first parole request was denied on September 20, 2019, but on January 23, 2020, Carter ended up being released 3 months early for good conduct. Criminals in Massachusetts are unable to profit from the publicity surrounding their case during the duration of both their incarceration and probation. Since Carter's probationary period came to an end in August 2022, she can now potentially benefit from the ongoing media attention surrounding her case. Thanks for watching. Would you rather have a narcissistic mother or a narcissistic partner? Let us know in the comments section below.